He took, his choice was to do what he did, and he could have chosen not to.
But can that choice to become a human bomb in the midst of a peaceful society ever be justified?
There does seem, among certain parts of the Middle East, to be something like a cult of death, an embracing of death rather than life.
The recent demonstration in London saw leftists marching, and the banners were saying, "We are all Hezbollah now." Well, if we are, we're finished.
Something has gone badly wrong, and we have to face up to it now. There must be no siding with fascism, no understanding of suicide bombers, no excuses for terror. I'm a journalist and commentator who's always been on the left of the political spectrum, pro-immigrant, pro-women's rights, internationalist. But right now, I'm appalled that some of my former comrades are coming close to justifying that negation of all human values, Islamist terror.
Here we are on the streets of Britain, people claiming to be big supporters of Hezbollah, the armed wing of Iran, this theocratic state developing a nuclear bomb to kill us with.
Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, has explicitly declared that he wants to kill Jews. That one of the reasons he's quite pleased about Zionism is that it tends to collect Jews in the one place where they would be the more easily killed. Now, people who say this is what we support, this is what we're in favour of, I think are lending themselves to a kind of racist discrimination that they really ought to be ashamed of.
It's the contention of many of the new apologists for terror that to understand the new dispensation, you have to travel to the Middle East. Specifically, that you have to understand the conflict as being between the almost wholly bad Israel and the just about entirely good Palestinians. Thank God there are still those on the left and centre-left who haven't quite lost their marbles over Israel and Palestine or the threat posed by Islamist terror. They do sometimes struggle to get a hearing, but that changes tonight.
The war in Lebanon is portrayed as, well, we told you so, that's what they would do. What would you expect? That's how the Israelis behave. Of course they would be disproportionate, of course they would kill civilians, particularly Arab civilians, that's what they do.
You have to say in the recent conflict, there was a wide sector of Western opinion which were untroubled by Israeli deaths, or much less troubled by Israeli deaths.
I think Britain is the fulcrum of this now in Europe, more than virtually any other place I know of, is that it, from the fringes of political opinion here, on the far right and the far left, has crept right into the center a kind of view of Israel as an intrinsically criminal state.
But what is this obsession with Israel-Palestine? In the years since the creation of the State of Israel in 1948 and the consequent dispossession of as many as 700,000 Palestinians, tens of thousands of Israeli Jews and Arabs and Palestinians have died. But in that same period, millions more have died elsewhere, including hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of Muslims killed in wars launched by other Muslims. 1 million in the Iran-Iraq war alone. Why don't these disasters cast equally long shadows?
There seems to be something about the conflict in the Middle East that inflames people's imaginations. They seem so ready to condemn the one side and demand understanding for the other side in ways that look as if they're prejudicial because they are so much the result of using double standards.
1,000 maybe plus or minus deaths in the Lebanon. How many deaths in Darfur? Hundreds of thousands. Nothing like the volume of outrage, shock, horror. You know, it's an order of magnitude there.
Dear comrades, we are gathered today in solidarity with the Palestinian people. Being traumatized.
Over Palestine, there's always anger in the streets. But when was the last time that the same streets saw mass demonstrations by thousands of slogan-chanting protesters calling for the West to intervene to stop, say, Chinese oppression in Tibet or Russian slaughter in Chechnya or even the neo-genocide in Darfur? Can't recall? Neither can I.
The UN General Assembly hardly ever calls special emergency sessions. It felt there was no need to call an emergency session to deal with the tragedy in East Timor, to deal with Rwanda. But in 2003 alone, it called 3 emergency sessions to deal with the Palestinian cause.
It's as though Israel has acted as a lightning conductor, its wars and conflicts taking attention away from those of other states. Once popular in the West, it was the war of 1967 and its aftermath that seems to have made Israel the pariah, turning it from doomed little guy into local bully.
Israel becomes a strong Israel, not the vulnerable Israel. And from that moment onwards, it's passed to the other side of the imperial divide. Now it's quite clearly on the side of the baddies, international imperialism, and it's not on the side of the weak, the vulnerable, and the oppressed struggling for freedom.
You might think attacks like that at Kiryat Shimona, where Palestinian fighters killed 18 Israeli civilians, including 9 children, would upset people who styled themselves humanitarian socialists. But in the 1970s, there was deep ambivalence among many on the left. Even when terrorists were blowing up civilian airliners or murdering Israeli athletes at the Munich Olympics.
I think what you saw was the emergence of a kind of terrorism that explicitly presented itself as part of a revolutionary ideology that identified itself as anti-imperialist, anti-colonialist.
The deep sympathy for the plight of the Palestinians translated into a tolerance of the crimes committed, some with the knowledge of the Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat. Just 2 years after the Munich Olympics terror attack, he was even invited to address the United Nations.
He would tell them, "I am a rebel and freedom is my cause." And this went down fantastically, not only with Western liberals and Western intellectuals, but among the numerous countries that had found independence in the 1960s.
But while the Western left felt attracted to the cause of the Palestinians, their fellow Arabs in the surrounding countries didn't always feel the same. At the start of the 1970s, the West's favourite Arab monarch, King Hussein of Jordan, was struggling with the consequence of having hundreds of thousands of Palestinian refugees living in squalor in his country. In September 1970, apparently fearful that Arafat was plotting to overthrow him, King Hussein struck out, bombing and shelling the Palestinian camps.
In the course of King Hussein's offensive against the Palestinian guerrillas, it's estimated that up to 5,000 Palestinian civilians were killed.
5,000 killed. Innocent women and children bombed as they hid in their tents. They called it Black September. What was the international response? Marches? Riots? Demands for sanctions? An academic boycott?
There has never been street demonstrations over any wrongs against the Palestinians by anyone other than Israel.
5 years later, the same thing happened again, this time in another Arab country, and once again, the West was silent.
In 1976, when Syria got involved in Lebanon in a major way, there was a 56-day siege of a Palestinian refugee camp by the Syrian army and Christian militias, which left an estimated 3,500 Palestinians dead.
I visited that camp 2 years later. In the intervening period, there had been no mass protests or public outrage, no demanding of UN sanctions against Syria, or placards with Assad assassin written on them.